to the well where the water runs deep. Stay here with me. Stay here with me.
Welcome once again, dear friends, to the Creative Recovery Initiative, where we create some space to consider addiction and alcoholism and the places, both creative and transformative, through which we seek our recovery and healing. People know us, and we know ourselves most completely by our stories, not by our beliefs even, or not by our associations, not even our values. We're known best by our stories. Whom do we know? What was our family life, our early childhood wounds, our friends, foes, our greatest joys and struggles in who we are becoming? The story I'm about to tell is not an easy one. It is my journey in and out and back in and back out of alcoholism. In the next few episodes of the Creative Recovery Initiative, I'd like to share my story, what we in AA like to call my experience, strength, and hope. I give you part one, where earth meets sky.
Come to the well where the water runs deep. Stay here with me. Stay here with me.
He stumbled back to his office, barely remembering the way, a well-trod path for the past 3 years. The hallway narrowed ominously with each fumbling step. The lights seemed more like taunting stars in some unknown sky. This familiar heaviness in his soul was peppered with liberal amounts of fear and doubt, and peppered a conscience, dulled and thin. His life had become one big bungee jump of risk versus survival, into which joy, let alone hope, was not allowed. At least that had been his inner narrative for more years than he could remember. Ugh, he grunted, managing a careless sprawl into his spinning office chair. Insidious narratives repeated themselves, the well-worn recordings that had become his fair-weather companions. I'm fine, he said to himself. If I stay here just a little longer, this will wear off. No one will be the wiser. Such was the insanity that had defined his path for so long. He reached into his desk drawer where sat what remained of a large bottle of dishwater wine, held in his hand the idea, however faint, that he could reach some measure of sobriety before heading home fled. He uncorked for another swig of life-giving death. It laughed all the way down and propped up his house of cards mind, at least until he sensed something was different. In the few minutes it had taken for this scenario to play out, a woman had found her way to his office doorway. He turned to see the face of his best friend's wife. He, a colleague on the church staff, she, a soprano in his choir, had been the sacred ground over which a broken family had walked for 2 years. A gentle, contemplative soul by nature, she was a Yale-educated, well-spoken, diminutive woman of silent wisdom and breathtaking compassion. And she was not given to confrontation of any kind. In fact, he had rarely heard her speak even at a normal conversational volume. Clearly, this was no friendly visit. "What the hell was all that?" she said coldly. "You were all over the place tonight. Nobody could understand, let alone follow what you were doing. You repeated yourself, and with gibberish at that. You're not even wearing shoes." Silence. The room changed from dark to darker. She was not one who typically spoke with such directness and was shaking like a fault-line tremor framed in his doorway. More silence. It was becoming clear to him, despite the clinical inebriation that now wreaked havoc with his brain, that she knew. Dear God, she knew. He had believed erroneously that he'd duped those around him into believing he was all right. Thank God for Hall's mentholyptus, chewing gum, physical distance, and the occasional cigarette, he had thought. It all evaporated with the realization that his cover was blown. More than blown. It was shattered like so many shards of sleeping glass. With icy intention she spoke, "Will you tell her, or shall I?" referring to his wife. "No, I'll tell her," he responded. Hints of his inner madness even now still clung to the distant hope that he sounded sober and in control. For what seemed like hours, she stood perfectly still, clearly expecting him to say more. Her gaze was withering, Superman on steroids. But it was characterized more by disappointment, sadness, and compassion rather than judgment. Good thing, too, since no one was better at self-condemnation than he. Still shaking, but satisfied enough her role was done, she turned and left, walking away down the dark hallway. He now faced a difficult choice. What was he to do with the line now drawn in the proverbial sand? Could he lay off drinking long enough to cast doubt on her words? Would his word outweigh hers when, or indeed if, it finally found its way to his wife? Rarely the recipient of cogent thought these days, he again reached into his desk for another drowning swallow. He determined inwardly that he would take his chances. It's what most desperate men do when faced with a showdown of inner demons. He sat at his desk for what seemed like 10 minutes more, but was in fact closer to an hour. At around 11:30, he arose and started the 20-minute walk home. Years of self-deception twisted into whispered lies within him. The inner debate fought on. How do I manage this one, he thought. If I take enough deep breaths of night air, walk at a brisk pace to get my heart rate up, maybe then? This battle was short-lived, however, as 2 blocks from their home, his wife pulled to the curb with the family van. She had been looking for him for over an hour, frantic, desperate. "Where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick." Her frightened, bewildered eyes bore a hole through him. They betrayed her own thoughts as she realized what had all along been her suspicion. She was staring at a drunk. As he fell into the van, something broke inside him. The titanic facade of pretension that had been his life for so many years collapsed into a heaving mass of desperation. "Yes," he cried. "I think I'm an alcoholic." With him, as with anyone who ever manages to make it this far, a journey had begun. A transformation. A journey where ultimately earth meets sky.
Drink here a while, drink here a while. Come to the well where the water runs deep. Stay here with me.